Section 6, Part 2 of Popular Tales from the Norse. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Popular Tales from the Norse by Sir George Webb Dasent. Section 6, Introduction Part 4, Norse Popular Tales, Part 2. The North was not free, any more than the rest of the Protestant world, from this direful superstition which ran over Europe like a pestilence in the 16th century. In Sweden especially, the witches and their midnight ridings to Blokulla, the Black Hill, gave occasion to processes as absurd and abominable as the trial of Dr. Fian and the witch findings of Hopkins. In Denmark, the sorceresses were supposed to meet at Tromsø, high up in Finnmark, or even on Hekla in Iceland. The Norse witches met at a blockhole of their own, or on the Dovrefell, or at other places in Norway or Finnmark. As might be expected, we find many traces of witchcraft in these tales, but it may be doubted whether these may not be referred rather to the old heathen belief in such arts still lingering in the popular mind than to the processes of the 15th and 16th centuries, which were far more a craze and mania of the educated classes acting under a mistaken religious fanaticism against popular superstitions, than a movement arising from the mass of the community. Still, in the Mastermaid, No. 11, the witch of a sister-in-law, who had rolled the apple over to the prince, and so charmed him, was torn to pieces between 24 horses. The old queen in The Lassie and Her Godmother, No. 27, tries to persuade her son to have the young queen burnt alive for a wicked witch, who was dumb, and had eaten her own babies. In East o' the Sun and West o' the Moon, No. 4, it is a wicked stepmother who has bewitched the prince. In Bushy Bride, No. 45, the ugly bride charms the king to sleep, and is at last thrown, with her wicked mother, into a pit full of snakes. In the 12 Wild Ducks, No. 8, the wicked stepmother persuades the king that Snow White and Rosy Red is a witch, and almost persuades him to burn her alive. In Tatterhood, No. 47, the whole troop of witches come to keep their revels on Christmas Eve in the queen's palace, and snap off the young princess's head. It is hard indeed, in tales where trolls play so great a part, to keep witch and troll separate. But the above instances will show that the belief in the one, as distinct from the other, exists in the popular superstitions of the North. The frequent transformation of men into beasts, in these tales, is another striking feature. This power the gods of the Norsemen possessed, in common with those of all other mythologies. Europa and her bull, Leda and her swan, will occur at once to the reader's mind, and to come to closer resemblances, just as Athene appears in the Odyssey as an eagle or a swallow perched on the roof of the hall, Odyssey 3:372 and 22:239, so Odin flies off as a falcon, and Loki takes the form of a horse or bird. This was only part of that omnipotence which all gods enjoy. But the belief that men, under certain conditions, could also take the shape of animals, is primeval, and the traditions of every race can tell of such transformations. Herodotus had heard how the Neurians, a Slavonic race, passed for wizards amongst the Scythians and the Greeks settled round the Black Sea, because each of them once in the year became a wolf for a few days, and then returned to his natural shape. Pomponius Mela and St. Augustine, in his great treatise De Civitate Dei, tell the same story, and Virgil in his Eclogues has sung the same belief. The Latins called such a man a turnskin versipellis, an expression which exactly agrees with the Icelandic expression for the same thing, and which is probably the true original of our turncoat. In Petronius the superstition appears in its full shape, and is worth repeating. At the banquet of Trimalchion, Nicoros gives the following account of the turnskins of Nero's time. It happened that my master was gone to Capua, to dispose of some second-hand goods. I took the opportunity and persuaded our guest to walk with me to the 5th milestone. He was a valiant soldier, and a sort of grim water-drinking Pluto. About cockcrow, when the moon was shining as bright as midday, we came among the monuments. My friend began addressing himself to the stars, but I was rather in a mood to sing or to count them. And when I turned to look at him, lo, he had already stripped himself and lain down his clothes near him. My heart was in my nostrils, and I stood like a dead man, but he circummincit vestimenta, and on a sudden became a wolf. Do not think I jest, I would not lie for any man's estate. But to return to what I was saying. When he became a wolf he began howling, and fled into the woods. At first I hardly knew where I was, and afterwards, when I went to take up his clothes, they were turned into stone. Who then died with fear but I? Yet I drew my sword and went cutting the air right and left, until I reached the villa of my sweetheart. I entered the courtyard. I almost breathed my last, the sweat ran down my neck, my eyes were dim, and I thought I should never recover myself. My Melissa wondered why I was out so late, and said to me, "Had you come sooner you might have at least helped us, for a wolf has entered the farm, and worried all of our cattle. But he had not the best of the joke, for all he escaped, for our slave ran a lance through his neck." When I heard this, I could not doubt how it was, and, as it was clear daylight, ran home as fast as a robbed innkeeper. When I came to the spot where the clothes had been turned into stone, I could find nothing except blood. But when I got home, I found my friend the soldier in bed, bleeding at the neck like an ox, and a doctor dressing his wound. I then knew he was a turnskin, nor would I ever have broke bread with him again, no, not if you had killed me. A man who had such a gift or greed was also called lycanthropus, or man-wolf, or wolf-man, which term the Anglo-Saxons translated literally in Canute's Laws werwolf, and the early English werewolf. In the Old French he was loup-garou, which means the same thing, except that garou means man-wolf in itself without the antecedent loup; so that, as Madden observes, the whole word is one of those reduplications, of which we have an example in lukewarm. In Brittany he was bleis-garou and den-bleis, formed respectively from bleis, wolf, and den, man. Garou is merely a distorted form of were, or ver, man and loup. In later French the word became warle, whence the Scotch wrote, whirl, and whirlin. It was not likely that a belief so widely spread should not have extended itself to the north, and the grave assertions of Olaus Magnus in the 16th century, in his treatise De Gentibus Septentrionalibus, show how common the belief in werewolves was, in Sweden, so late as the time of Gustavus Vasa. In mythical times, the Volsunga Saga, Fornald's Sag, 1:130-131, expressly states of Sigmund and Sinfjotli that they became werewolves, which, we may remark, were Odin's sacred beasts, just in the same way as Brynhildr and the Valkyries, or Corse choosers, who followed the god of battles to the field, and chose the dead for Valhalla when the fight was done, became swan maidens, and took the shape of swans. In either case the wolf's skin or the swan's feathery covering was assumed and laid aside at pleasure, though the Volundr Quidr, in the Edda, and the stories of the fair Melusina, and other medieval swan maidens, show that anyone who seized that shape while thus laid aside had power over its wearer. In later times, when this old heroic belief degenerated into the notion of sorcery, it was supposed that a girdle of wolfskin thrown over the body, or even a slap on the face with a wolfskin glove, could transform the person upon whom the sorcerer practised into a shape of a ravening wolf, which fled at once to the woods, where he remained in that shape for a period which varied in popular belief for 9 days, 3, 7, or 9 years. While in this state he was especially ravenous after young children, whom he carried off as the werewolf carried off William in the old romance, though all werewolves did not treat their prey with the same tenderness as that werewolf treated William. But the favorite beast for Norse transformations in historic times, if we may judge from the evidence afforded by the sagas, was the bear, the king of all their beasts, whose strength and sagacity made him an object of great respect. This old belief, then, might be expected to be found in these Norse tales, and accordingly we find men transformed in them into various beasts. Of old these transformations, as we have already stated, were active, if we may use the expression, as well as passive. A man who possessed the gift frequently assumed the shape of a beast at his own will and pleasure, like the soldier of Petronius. Even now in Norway it is a matter of popular belief that Finns and Lapps, who from time immemorial have passed for their most skilful witches and wizards in the world, can at will assume the shape of bears; and it is a common thing to say of one of these beasts, when he gets unusually savage and daring, "That can be no Christian bear." On such a bear, in the parish of Ofodin, after he had worried to death more than 60 horses and 6 men, it is said that a girdle of bearskin, the infallible mark of a man thus transformed, was found when he was at last tracked and slain. The tale called Farmer Weathersky, number 41 in this collection, shows that the belief of these spontaneous transformations still exists in popular tradition, where it is easy to see that Farmer Weathersky is only one of the ancient gods degraded into a demon's shape. His sudden departure through the air, horse, sledge, and lad and all, and his answer, "I'm at home alike north and south and east and west," his name itself, and his distant abode, surrounded with the corpses of the slain, sufficiently betray the divinity in disguise. His transformation, too, into a hawk answers exactly to that of Odin when he flew away from the Frost Giant in the shape of that bird. But on these tales such transformations are for the most part passive; they occur not at the will of the person transformed, but through sorcery practised on them by some one else. Thus the white bear in the beautiful story of East of the Sun and West of the Moon, No. 4, is a prince transformed by his stepmother, just as it is the stepmother who plays the same part in the romance of William and the Werewolf. So the horse in The Widow's Son, No. 44, is a prince over whom a king has cast that shape. So also in Lord Peter, No. 42, which is the full story of what we have only hitherto known in part as Puss in Boots, the cat is a princess bewitched by the Troll who had robbed her of her lands. So also in The Seven Foals, No. 43, and The 12 Wild Ducks, No. 8, the foals and the ducks are princes over whom that fate has come by the power of a witch or a troll, to whom an unwary promise had been given. Thoroughly mythic is the trait in The 12 Wild Ducks, where the youngest brother reappears with a wild duck's wing instead of his left arm, because his sister had no time to finish that portion of the shirt, upon the completion of which his retransformation depended. But we should ill understand the spirit of the Norsemen, if we supposed that these transformations into beasts were all that the national heart has to tell of beasts and their doings, or that, when they appear, they do so merely as men-beasts, without any power or virtue of their own. From the earliest times, side by side with these productions of the human mind which speak of the dealings of men with men, there has grown up a stock of traditions about animals and their relations with one another, which forms a true beast epic, and is full of the liveliest traits of nature. Here too it was reserved for Grimm to restore these traditions to their true place in the history of the human mind, and show that the poetry which treats of them is neither satirical nor didactic, though it may contain touches of both these artificial kinds of composition, but on the contrary, purely and intensely natural. It is epic, in short, springing out of that deep love of nature and close observation of the habits of animals, which is only possible in an early and simple stage of society. It used to be the fashion, when these beast traditions were noticed, to point to Aesop as their original, but Grimm has sufficiently proved, Reinhard Fuchs' Introduction, that what we see in Aesop is only the remains of a great world-old cycle of such traditions which had already, in Aesop's day, been subjected by the Greek mind to that critical process which a late state of society brings to bear on popular traditions, that they were then already worn and washed out and moralized. He had also shown how the same process went on till in Phaedrus nothing but the dry bones of the traditions, with a drier moral, are served up to the reader; and he has done justice on La Fontaine, who wrote with all the wanton licentiousness of his day, and frittered away the whole nature of his fables by the frivolity of his allusions to the artificial society of his time. Nor has he spared Lessing, who, though he saw through the poverty of Phaedrus as compared with Aesop, and was alive to the weakness of La Fontaine, still wandered about in the classical mist which hung heavy over the learning of the 18th century, and saw in the Greek form the perfection of all fable, when in Aesop it really appears in a state of degeneracy and decay. Here too, as in so many other things, we have a proof that the world is older than we think it. The beast fables in the Pancha Tantra and the Hitopadesa, the Indian parallels to Aesop, reveal, in the connection in which they occur, and in the moral use to which they are put, a state of society long past that simple early time in which such fictions arise. They must have sprung up in the East in the very dawn of time, and thence travelling in all directions, we find them after many centuries in various shapes, which admit of no mistake as to their first origin, at the very ends of the earth, in countries as opposite as the poles to each other, in New Zealand and Norway, in Central Africa and Servia, in the West Indies and in Mongolia, all separated by immense tracts of land or sea from their common centre. To the earnest inquirer, to one who believes that many dark things may yet be solved, it is very satisfactory to see that even Grimm, in his Reynard the Fox, is at a loss to understand why the North, properly so called, had none of the traditions which the Middle Age moulded into that famous beast epic. But since then the North, as the great master himself confesses in his later works, has amply avenged herself for the slight thus cast upon her by mistake. In the year 1834, when Grimm thus expressed his surprise on this point, the North had no such traditions to show in books indeed, but she kept them stored up in her heart in an abundance with which no other land perhaps can vie. This book at least shows how natural it seems to the Norse mind now, and how much more natural of course it seemed in earlier times, when sense went for as much, and reflection for so little, that beasts should talk, and how truly and faithfully it has listened and looked for the accents and character of each. The bear is still the king of beasts, in which character he appears in True and Untrue, No. 1, but here, as in Germany, he is no match for the fox in wit. Thus, Reynard plays him a trick which condemns him forever to a stumpy tail in No. 23. He cheats him out of his share of a firkin of butter in No. 52. He is preferred as herdsman in No. 10, before either bear or wolf, by the old wife who wants some one to tend her flock. Yet all the while he professes immense respect for the bear, and calls him lord, even when in the very act of outwitting him. In the tale called Well Done and Ill Paid, No. 38, the crafty fox puts a finish to his misbehavior to his lord Bruin, by handing him over, bound hand and foot, to the peasant, and by causing his death outright. Here, too, we have an example, which we shall see repeated in the case of the giants, that strength and stature are not always wise, and that wit and wisdom never fail to carry the day against mere brute force. Another tale, however, restores the bear to his true place as the king of beasts, endowed not only with strength, but with something divine and terrible about him, which the Trolls cannot withstand. This is The Cat on the Dovrefell, No. 12, in connection with which it should be remembered that the same tradition existed in the 13th century in Germany, that the bear is called familiarly Grandfather in the North, and that the Lapps reckon him rather as akin to man than beasts; that they say he has the strength of 10 and the wit of 12 men. If they slay him, they formally beg his pardon, as do also the Ostiaks, a tribe akin to the Lapps, and bring him to their huts with great formalities and mystic songs. To the wolf, whose nickname is Greylegs, these tales are more complimentary. He is not the spiteful, stupid, greedy Isengrim of Germany and France. Not that Isengrim, of whom the old English fables of the 13th century tell us that he became a monk, but when the brethren wished to teach him his letters, that he might learn the Paternoster, all they could get out of him was lamb, lamb, nor could they ever get him to look to the cross, for his eyes, with his thoughts, were ever to the woodward. Duce, Illustration to Shakespeare, Vol. II, 33, Sect. 344, quoted in Reinhard Fuchs, 221. He appears, on the contrary, in The Giant Who Had No Heart in His Body, No. 9, as a kindly grateful beast, who repays tenfold out of the hidden store of his supernatural sagacity the gift of the old jade, which Boots had made over to him. The horse was a sacred animal among the Teutonic tribes from the first moment of their appearance in history, and Tacitus (Germania, 9 and 10) has related, how in the shade of these woods and groves which served them for temples, white horses were fed at the public cost, whose backs no mortal man crossed, whose neighings and snortings were carefully watched as auguries and omens, and who were thought to be conscious of divine mysteries. In Persia, too, the classical writer will remember how the neighing of a horse decided the choice for the crown. Here, in England, at any rate, we have only to think of Hengist and Horsa, the twin heroes of the Anglo-Saxon migration, as the legend ran, heroes whose name meant horse, and of the Vale of the White Horse, in Berkshire, where the sacred form still gleams along the down, to be reminded of the sacredness of the horse to our forefathers. The Eddas are filled with the names of famous horses, and the Sagas contain many stories of good steeds, in whom their owners trusted and believed as sacred to this or that particular god. Such a horse is Dapplegrim in No. 40 of these tales, who saves his master out of all his perils, and brings him to all fortune, and is another example of that mysterious connection with the higher powers which animals in all ages have been supposed to possess. Such a friend, too, to the helpless lassie is the dun bull in Katie Woodencloak, No. 1, out of whose ear comes the wishing cloth, which serves up the choicest dishes. The story is probably imperfect, as we would expect to see him again in human shape after his head was cut off and his skin flayed; but, after being the chief character up to that point, he remains from that time forth in the background, and we only see him darkly in the man who comes out of the face of the rock and supplies the lassie's wants when she knocks on it. Dun, or blue, or mouse colour, is the favourite colour for fairy kine. Thus the cow which Guy of Warwick killed was dun. The Huldror in Norway gave large flocks of blue kine. In Scotland runs the story of the mouse-coloured elfin bull. In Iceland the colour of such kine is apalgrar, dapple grey. This animal has been an object of adoration and respect from the earliest times, and we need only to remind our readers of the sanctity of cows and bulls among the Indians and Egyptians, or the golden calf in the Bible; of Io and her wanderings from land to land; and, though last, not least, of Audhumla, the mythic cow in the Edda, who had so large a part in the creation of the first giant in human forms. Sennaros's Edda, Chapter 4, English translation. The dog, to which with all his sagacity and faithfulness something unclean and impure clings, as Grimm well observes, plays no very prominent part in these tales. We find him, however, in Not a Pin to Choose Between Them, No. 24, where his sagacity fails to detect his mistress; and, as the foe of his own house, the half-bred foxy hound, who chases away the cunning fox in Well Done and Ill Paid, No. 38. Still he, too, in popular superstition, is gifted with the sense of the supernatural. He howls when death impends; and in Buttercup, No. 18, it is Goldtooth, their dog, who warns Buttercup and his mother of the approach of the old hag. In Bushy Bride, No. 45, he appears only as the lassie's lap-dog, is thrown away as one of her sacrifices, and at last goes to the wedding in her coach, yet in that tale he has something weird about him, and he is sent out by his mistress 3 times to see if the dawn is coming. In one tale, No. 37, the goat appears in full force, and dashes out the brains of the Troll, who lived under the bridge over the burn. In another, Tatterhood, No. 48, he helps the lassie in her onslaught on the witches. He, too, was sacred to Thor in the old mythology, and drew his thundering car. Here something of the divine nature of his former lord, who was the great foe of all Trolls, seems to have been passed on in popular tradition to the animal who had seen so many adventures with the great god who swayed the thunder. This feud between the goat and the Trolls comes out curiously in The Old Dame and her Hen, No. 3, where a goat falls down the trapdoor to the Troll's house. "Who sent for you, I should like to know, you long-bearded beast," said the man of the hill, who was in an awful rage; and with that he whipped up the goat, wrung his head off, and threw him down into the cellar. Still, he belonged to one of the heathen gods, and so in later Middle Age superstition he is assigned to the devil, who even takes his shape when he presides at the witches' sabbath. Nor in this list must the little birds be forgotten which taught the man's daughter, in the tale of the 2 stepsisters, No. 17, how to act in her trials. So too in Katie Woodencloak, No. 50, the little bird tells the prince, who understood the song of birds very well, that blood is gushing out of the golden shoe. The belief that some persons had the gift of understanding what the birds said, is primeval. We pay homage to it in our proverbial expression, "A little bird told me." Popular traditions and rhymes protect their nests, as in the case of the wren, the robin, and the swallow. Occasionally this gift seems to have been acquired by eating or tasting the flesh of a snake or dragon, as Sigurd in the Volsung tale first became aware of Regin's designs against his life, when he accidentally tasted the heart-blood of Fafnir, whom he had slain in dragon shape, and then all at once the swallow's song, perched above him, became as intelligible as human speech. We now come to a class of beings which plays a large part, and always for ill, in these tales. These are the Giants, or Trolls. In modern Norse tradition there is little difference between the names, but originally Troll was a more general expression for a supernatural being than Giant, which was rather confined to a race more dull than wicked. In the Giants we have the wantonness of boundless bodily strength and size, which, trusting entirely to these qualities, falls at last by its own weight. At first it is true that proverbial wisdom, all the stores of traditional lore, all that can be learnt by what we may call rule of thumb, was ascribed to them. One sympathizes, too, with them, and almost pities them as the representatives of a simple primitive race, whose day is past and gone, but who still possessed something of the innocence and virtue of ancient times, together with a stock of old experience, which, however useful it might be as an example to others, was quite useless to help themselves. They are the old Tories of mythology, as opposed to the Aesir, the advanced liberals. They can look back and say what has been, but to look forward to say what will be, and shall be, and to mould the future, is beyond their ken. True as gold to the traditional and received, and worthless as dross for the new and progressive. Such a nature, when unprovoked, is easy and simple, but rouse it, and its exuberant strength rises in a paroxysm of rage, though its clumsy awkward blows, guided by mere cunning, fail to strike the slight and lissom foe, who waits for and eludes the stroke, until his reason gives him the mastery over sheer brute force which has wearied itself out by its own exertions. This race, and that of the upstart Aesir, though almost always at feud, still had their intervals of common intercourse, and even social enjoyment. Marriages take place between them, visits are paid, feasts are given, ale is breached, and mirth is fast and furious. Thor was the worst foe the giants ever had, and yet he met them sometimes on good terms. They were destined to meet once and for all on that awful day, the twilight of the gods, but till then, they entertained for each other some sense of mutual respect. The Trolls, on the other hand, with whom mankind had more to do, were supposed to be less easy-tempered, and more systematically malignant, than the giants, and with the term were bound up notions of sorcery and unholy power. But mythology is a woof of many colors, of which the hues are shot and blended, so that the various races of supernatural beings are shaded off, and fade away almost imperceptibly into each other; and thus, even in heathen times, it must have been hard to say exactly where the giant ended and the Troll began. But when Christianity came in, and heathendom fell, when the godlike race of the Aesir became evil demons instead of good genial powers, then all the objects of the old popular belief, whether Aesir, giants, or Trolls, were mingled together in one superstition, as no canny. They were all Trolls, all malignant; and thus it was that, in these tales, the traditions about Odin and his underlings, about the Frost Giants, and about sorcerers and wizards, are confused and garbled; and all supernatural agency that plots man's ill is the work of Trolls, whether the agent be the arch-enemy himself, or giant, or witch, or wizard. In tales such as The Old Dame and her Hen, No. 3, The Giant who had no heart in his body, No. 9, Shortshanks, No. 20, Boots and the Troll, No. 32, Boots who ate a match with the Troll, No. 5, the easy temper of the old Frost Giants predominates, and we almost pity them as we read. In another, The Big Bird Dan, No. 55, we have a Troll Prince, who appears as a generous benefactor to the young prince, and lends him a sword by help of which he slays the king of the Trolls, just as we sometimes find in the Edda friendly meetings between the Aesir and this, or the Frost Giant. In Tatterhood, No. 48, the Trolls are very near akin to the witches of the Middle Age. In other tales, as The Mastermind, No. 11, The Blue Belt, No. 22, Farmer Weathersky, No. 41, a sort of settled malignity against man appears as the direct working and result of a bad and evil spirit. In Buttercup, No. 18, and The Cat in the Dovrefell, we have the Troll proper, the supernatural dwellers of the woods and hills, who go to church and eat men and porridge and sausages indifferently, not from malignity, but because they know no better, because it is their nature, and because they have always done so. In one point they all agree, in their place of abode. The wild pine forest that clothes the spurs of the fells, but more than all, the interior recesses of the rocky fell itself, is where the Trolls live. Thither they carry off the children of men, and to them belongs all the untold riches of the mineral world. There, in caves and clefts in the steep face of the rock, sits the Troll, as the representative of the old giants, among heaps of gold and silver and precious things. They stride off into the dark forest by day, whither no rays of the sun can pierce. They return home at nightfall, feast themselves full, and snore out the night. One thing was fatal to them, the sight of the sun. If they looked him full in the face, his glory was too great for them, and they burst, as in Lord Peter, No. 42, and in The Old Dame and her Hen, No. 3. This, too, is a deeply mythic trait. The old religion of the North was a bright and lively faith. It lived in the light of joy and gladness. Its gods were the blithe powers. Opposed to them were the dark forces of mist and gloom, who could not bear the glorious face of the sun, of Baldur's beaming visage, or the bright flash of Thor's levin bolt. In one aspect, the whole race of giants and trolls stands out in strong historical light. There can be little doubt that, in their continued existence amongst the woods and rocks and hills, we have a memory of the gradual suppression and extinction of some hostile race, who gradually retired into the natural fastnesses of the land, and speedily became mythic. Nor, if we bear in mind their natural position, and remember how constantly the infamy of sorcery has clung to the Finns and Lapps, shall we have far to go to seek this ancient race, even at the present day. Between this outcast nomad race, which wandered from forest to forest and from fell to fell, without a fixed place of abode, and the old natural powers and frost giants, the minds of the race which adored Odin and the Aesir soon engendered a monstrous man-eating cross-breed of supernatural beings, who fled from contact with the intruders as soon as the first great struggle was over, abhorred the light of day, and looked upon agriculture and tillage as a dangerous innovation which destroyed their hunting fields, and was destined finally to root them out from off the face of the earth. This fact appears in countless stories all over the globe, for man is true to himself in all climes, and the savage in Africa or across the Rocky Mountains dreads tillage and detests the plough as much as any Lapp or Samoyed. "See what pretty playthings, mother!" cries the giant's daughter as she unties her apron, and shows her a plough, and horses, and peasants. "Back with them this instant!" cries the mother in wrath, "and put them down as carefully as you can, for these playthings can do our race great harm, and when these come we must budge." "What sort of an earthworm is this?" said one giant to another, when they met a man as they walked. "These are the earthworms that will one day eat us up, brother," answered the other, and soon both giants left that part of Germany. Nor does this trait appear less strongly in these Norse tales. The giants or trolls can neither brew nor wash properly, as we see in Shortshanks No. 20, where the ogre has to get Shortshanks to brew his ale for him, and in East of the Sun and West of the Moon, No. 4, where none of the trolls are able to wash out the spot of tallow. So also in the Two Step-sisters, No. 17, the old witch is forced to get human maids to do her household work; and lastly, the best example of all, in Lord Peter, No. 42, where agriculture is plainly a secret of mankind, which the giants were eager to learn, but which was a branch of knowledge beyond their power to attain. "Stop a bit," said the cat, "and I'll tell you how the farmer sets to work to get in his winter rye." And so she told him such a long story about the winter rye. First of all, you see, he ploughs the field, and then he dungs it, and then he ploughs it again, and then he harrows it, and so she went on until the sun rose. Before we leave these gigantic natural powers, let us linger a moment to point out how heartily the winds are sketched in these tales as four brothers, of whom, of course, the North Wind is the oldest, and strongest, and roughest. But though rough in form and tongue, he is a genial, kind-hearted fellow after all. He carries the lassie to the castle, East of the Sun and West of the Moon, whither none of his brothers had strength to blow. All he asks is that she won't be afraid, and then he takes a good rest, and puffs himself up with as much breath as ever he can hold, begins to blow a storm, and off they go. So, too, in The Lad Who Went to the North Wind, No. 34, though he can't restore the meal he carried off, he gives the lad 3 things which make his fortune, and amply repay him. He, too, like the Grecian Boreas, is divine, and lineally descended from Hraesvelgr, that great giant in the Edda, who sits at the end of the world in eagle's shape, and when he flaps his wings, all the winds come that blow upon men. Enough surely has now been said to shew that the old religion and mythology of the Norsemen still lives disguised in these popular tales. Besides this internal evidence, we find here and there, in the written literature of earlier days, hints that the same stories were even then current, and current then as now, among the lower classes. Thus, in King Sverri's Saga we read, "And so it is just like what is said to have happened in the old stories of what the king's children suffered from their stepmother's ill will." And again, in Olaf Tryggvason's Saga, by the monk Odd, "And better is it to hear such things with mirth, than stepmother's stories which shepherds tell, where no one can tell whether anything is true, and where the king is always made the least in their narrative." But in truth, no such positive evidence is needed. Any one who has read the Volsung tale as we have given it, will be at no loss to see where the little birds who speak to the Prince and the lassie in these tales come from; nor when they read in the Big Bird Dan, No. 55, about the naked sword, which the Princess lays by her side every night, will they fail to recognize Sigurd's sword Gram, which he laid beside himself and Brynhildr when he rode through the flame and won her for Gunnar. These mythical deep-rooted groves, throwing out fresh shoots from age to age in the popular literature of the race, are far more convincing proofs of the early existence of these traditions than any mere external evidence. Section 7